Hello and welcome back to the Crash MotoGP podcast. My name is Harry Benjamin. It's episode 6. And on the show this week, we look back on an action-packed, entertaining and a bit of a bizarre MotoGP race in Spain. The first event to see fans return to the stands. And it was all looking set from the outset, I think, for a lot of people, that it was going to be a Fabio Quartararo win. But it turned out to be anything but. A warning, I think, to all of us. Predict MotoGP if you dare, because it was Miguel Oliveira who took the win ahead of Johann Zarco, and Jack Miller rounded out the podium. But it was far from simple. To discuss it all with me, of course, former rider, British champion and commentator Keith Huewen, and Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren. Lots to discuss as ever, guys. Let's dive straight in with our race winner. And I mean, who'd have thought that? I think we all kind of said last week, yeah, maybe a podium, but to take the win and do it convincingly, Miguel Oliveira, that KTM bike, Keith, it's come alive for him in the last couple of races, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, there's been quite a lot reported about the KTM changes. Obviously, they've made some chassis changes, which have obviously worked, and they're getting what they want to get. And it's kind of a lot of people scratch their head with these jobs because, I mean, they've got apparently a little bit more flex, but still get the grip coming out of corners, so on and so forth. But I think the thing that's confusing most people, including me, I've got to say, because I'm not that smart, as you already know, even Harry's found me out on that one, Pete. But it's kind of this fuel change that they've made. They've got a different manufacturer of fuel that they're using as well, which is obviously allowing them to do something slightly different as far as the way that the thing is fueled. And it does make a difference. Now, getting to the bottom of the specification of a fuel type, even Simon Crafar, Dorna's tech man on the site, who's been used to all of this stuff throughout his career, has had a real job trying to work out exactly where the differences are and what's going to be allowed. I think we touched on it last time when we spoke about it, the fueling. I'm always a bit skeptical because obviously it's got a specification. It's got to hit all the markers chemically. You can't just put something better in over and above everybody else. It's got to work within the specifications that's given by the tech people at trackside. But it's obviously enabled KTM. I mean, it looks fast, the bike does. It's obviously working really well. It's obviously working in, again, a combination with this new chassis. Everything you do, when you improve one thing, you've got to find another 10 things that work with it. It's not just you get more horsepower, because more horsepower means the bike handles differently, or worse even in a lot of cases. It's always been Honda's case. We talked about that last time out as well, with the electronics that control the Honda. When they went to the spec electronics, that's when they had a load more aggravation because they couldn't manage the style of delivery that the Honda has. So with the KTM, these combinations, I mean, it's no rocket science. The kid's gone good since they've made the changes. Add them up.
Yeah, Pete, I mean, if he carries on like this, do you think, well, Oliveira, do you think he'll be up there consistently now?
You've got to believe so. I mean, Oliveira is a very cool-headed guy, and, you know, he didn't want to make any assumptions, but it's 2 races now, 2 different tracks where, you know, these changes, as Keith is mentioning there, that they've clearly worked and they've clearly taken a step forward. Perhaps we also need to mention that the KTM is the only steel trellis frame on the grid. And what that allows them to do, it seems, is to make changes really quickly. You know, you can make a new chassis much quicker than you can if you make it out of aluminium. And so maybe that's part of it. I mean, we all remember when they first came in, everyone was criticizing them. You'll never win in MotoGP with that. You know, it's a single tire rule. You've got to build the chassis around the tires. Everyone else is using the aluminium twin spar frame. You know, you should do that. But they stuck to it because they said, look, it's not about what the material is. It's about what the numbers are. You know, it's about you deciding what numbers I need to flex this way, that way, and making the frame do that. And so they've been able, you know, maybe that's been a factor in this quick turnaround that they've been able to do from these early race problems with the tyres that Keith has mentioned in the earlier episodes. They've now got the frame working with the tyres at least 2 different tracks. It's not just Oliveira. Binder's going well as well. So it's all looking good for them, yeah.
Although I've got to say that Binder perhaps hasn't gone as good as you might have expected with the changes. But sticking with the chassis thing at the moment, it's a lot easier to cut a tube out of something than it is to do an aluminium extrusion. And the amount of work you've got to do to change a normal style chassis, well, I'll call it normal style. It is what it is. But, you know, to have the technology to be able to work out exactly what you've got to do to make these things work. I mean, this is a dark art. This is something that I'm so impressed with KTM, the way that they've folded their Moto 2 campaign to move all their techs, all their resources behind the KTM MotoGP bike to make sure that they got that right, and it's paying dividends. It's working out now. Oliveira seems to have got it sorted out with the new one. I was slightly surprised at Binder. Binder, he certainly wasn't lacking any aggression in that race every time I saw what he was up to. So, and normally when you've got a track like Catalunya, which wrecks tyres and yet is slippery, I know it's a combination you don't usually expect. Normally when it's slippery, tyres last fairly well. But with this track, as indeed the next one we're going to, actually, when you get to Sachsenring, you've got like 30 seconds on the left-hand side of the tyre. We'll wait and see who works around there. But the point being is that somehow that KTM, did you see the consistency of Oliveira's time? I couldn't believe it when they put the big long list up in the tower on the side of the screen. You just look at it and you think, hang on a minute. It's like a cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste. I've never seen such consistency through the race. It was only the last 2 or 3 laps that he started to sort of just slip a little bit from that, what was it, 40.4, 40.6, 40.2, whatever it was. Unbelievable consistency. I mean, when you come back in and you look at that as a rider, as a team, you go, boy's doing his job. When you used to see Maverick Vinales, he'd start off, he'd lose the race in the first 3 or 4 laps, 5 laps, and then all of a sudden, towards the end of the race, he'd do his fastest lap right at the end of the race. And you think, hang on a second, that's not the way round. You need to have some more consistency in there. You need to use your tyre up. You should have really virtually no tyre left at the end of the race. That's the perfect scenario. You've had all the goodness out of it right to the very end. You've judged it to perfection. And Oliveira did.
Did you guys think that maybe when Quartararo obviously starting from pole, I think everybody kind of expected he would pretty much run away with it, but Oliveira stuck with him and got him into the first corner. So it wasn't like Oliveira had to fight for it, because then Quartararo came back to him. But I thought that Quartararo might have been playing a bit of the long game, just sort of sit behind him. But actually, was it the other way around? Was it Oliveira actually? He seemed to have the more confident bike in the end.
How many times do we see this in motorbike racing, that from day to day, the track and the conditions seem to change? It was a situation where it was only a few degrees different, I think, in track temperature than what they'd run already. But the fact of the matter was that Quartararo didn't look like Quartararo. He looked smooth and all the rest of it, but he was nowhere near as fast on average over the race as he was predicting to be from what we've seen already this week. Oliveira stepped up, Quartararo went the other way, and we got what we got. You can never really answer it. It's a strange thing. If you're sat on site, if you're in a team, and then you can get these kind of indications, but none of them will give them to you. A press conference, the amount of Zoom calls, whatever you're doing, they're never going to tell you where the problem was. Poor old Pete, he's like he gets whipped by all these people trying to get to the bottom of these questions, and they avoid it like the plague. But they know there are reasons they can fight. They know what those reasons are. They have got the data. They will be working through everything. But Quartararo's below par. Oliveira stepped up.
Just to add to that, Keith, and Fabio agreed with you. And not only that, he thought that something happened to all of the Yamahas on Sunday. He actually said he thought Morbidelli was looking really good. And Morbidelli was, 9th? All of the Yamahas seemed to have a tougher race than they were expecting. And, and a few of them said, was it the right choice to go with the hard rear tyre? But it had worked well when they tried it on the Saturday and everything else. As you say, a few degrees different, everything changed. And it seemed like, in general, the Yamahas were the ones to lose.
Can't even blame rain, because they had a few spots of it this morning, and that was it. It wasn't like the rain will have washed the track away and made it green. The track was in pretty good order all the way through. So I don't know. It's one of them ones, whereas the next couple of days, people will be working out. I mean, there's a bit of testing going on there, isn't there, on Monday as well. So I think Sylvain Gintoli is putting his microphone down and actually doing some work tomorrow for Suzuki. They'll be trying to work their way through it as well. Going to be a lot of head scratching, mid-season where we are at the moment. It's not over. I mean, how many times do we see this? We get to the middle of the season, and all of a sudden the whole year switches. That mid-season break you get, championships can be lost once we come back from this. When we get into the mid-season break, it's going to be really interesting to see who can keep the momentum going in the second half of the year, if we have a second half of the year, of course.
Well, you say head scratching. I think a lot of people will be doing that. Let's talk about the Fabio Quartararo incident. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. You may have done, but feel free to explain it to me. But it's what looked like his overalls just sort of came undone, or he appeared on screen, The zip was all the way down. He got rid of his protective chest plate, rode with the rest of his race with the zip down, and that seemed incredibly dangerous, reckless. How did it happen? Why did it happen? I've never seen anything like it. Why was he not black flagged? Because surely that is a dangerous thing to do.
It's a clothing malfunction. When you get them on stage at a pop concert or something, it's all quite amusing for us and sometimes more entertaining. But he's got a good old bloody chest on him, hasn't he?
Well, yeah.
You see it for 3.5 laps. I mean, there'll be a lot of people that would have been quite enjoying that. But the problem is, it's only a zip. At the end of the day, it's a zip. It obviously wasn't broken. The first thought you had, maybe he popped his airbag. Maybe what you got to remember, that zip is strong because it puts up with an airbag that explodes underneath it. When the algorithms pop the airbag, it fires up an airbag all the way around his shoulders and some around the hips as well. So that zip doesn't get pulled apart. It's not a weak zip. It's made hellishly durable. But I've had it before. If you've not got it right, you've not got your little Velcro thing over the top of it can, for some reason or another, undo. It can slide down on its own accord. You know, you're talking 200 mile an hour motorbikes. There's a fair bit of wind going on around them. There's a fair bit going, and it's something that can be, I suppose, unzipped. And once it's unzipped, you know, it's like anything else. You try bloody doing a zip back up when you're travelling at that kind of rate of knots. His chest pad that he had to throw out like a frisbee to get rid of it. I'm surprised no one said anything about that yet. Actually, chucking that out onto the track as well is another item of danger. For me, I'm with the majority on this one. I don't, as you know, I don't usually shy away from anything controversial. But he should have been black flagged. I mean, it was 1,000%. There isn't anything strictly in the rules, although it says that you must be zipped up accordingly. All your equipment must be done up accordingly, But I couldn't find anything in the rule book that says that there's a specific penalty for riding around with your zip undone. But the fact is, it's just incredibly dangerous. So there will be a rule that covers the fact under safety. That will be there. The wonderful thing about a MotoGP rule book, it's not that thick. It's not like a Formula One rule book, which is like several volumes. It is a fairly thin item that gives autonomy to stewards and race control to be able to do within certain parameters pretty much what they want to do. Of course, it all got combined with that little run on he had at turn one, which meant that he went off the track. He didn't give... I never understand how bloody riders are supposed to count to one. I mean, so you run off the track and you've got to give back a second. What the frig is a second to a rider when you're riding at that kind of pace and you're trying to hold on to a bike that's trying to bloody throw you off? You've got your zip undone, down to your middle. I mean, it's just impossible for him to do it. But the rule is there. It's a virtual sand trap. It's a virtual gravel trap. That's what it's supposed to be. So the time penalty is to give you a penalty as if you had run onto gravel or grass. That's the idea of it. So he should have given up a second, which isn't much at the end of the day. In the end, he copped 3 seconds for only giving up 0.7 of one. And it cost him. But my money, he's bloody lucky. He's lucky he wasn't black flagged. He should have been black flagged. It was a safety issue. Fall over at 200 mile an hour without the right protective gear on, and you are going to be absolutely skinned.
I was watching it with my hands over my eyes at one point, Pete, because that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, I think they said it on the commentary, you've got to protect these riders from themselves sometimes as well, because he's not going to pull over and stop, is he? So, no. But if
his helmet came off, he'd still ride.
Yeah, exactly. So it's up to the organisers. And actually, Neil Cameron's got a question from Facebook. Actually, Pete, what was Fabio like post race? What's he said? Because he's not going to admit to huge wrongdoing. And he feels like he's had the penalty, and he feels like that's case in point. But as you say, it's not just the zip. It was also the fact that he chucked the thing onto the chest plate onto the circuit. So dangerous.
Yeah, it was a very dejected Fabio after the race. He didn't want to speak, as they never do with safety issues. If there's any problems with things like brakes, of course, that's the classic one on bikes. You never get a clear answer as to what went wrong, whether the brakes failed or they weren't installed right. And it's a bit like that with any safety equipment. And so he just said he didn't know. He just said the leathers suddenly opened at turn one and he couldn't close them again. That's it. And that it's being looked at. He didn't mention anything about the chest protector. But clearly, the riders that finished on the podium all sort of agreed, look, in that situation, you should get a black flag. It's kind of a bit like having a smoking engine, isn't it? You would get a black and orange flag.
Exactly that's the safety for everyone else, though, isn't it? The black and orange flag is the safety for everyone else, whereas this, really was about a rider from himself.
Yeah, unless you get oil on your own wheel. But they were saying, look, he should have had a black flag. Everyone seemed to agree. That Fabio, of course, didn't agree. He said, well, hang on, I've already got a penalty. He wasn't too happy with the penalty that Keith's just been talking about for straight lining the chicane.
I don't think he should have been given another penalty at the end of it. If they'd stacked another one on top of him, and I'd be 100% on Fabio's side. They've given him a penalty. That's it. It was a race direction or stewards or whoever was dealing with it at the end of the day didn't give him a penalty for having his zip undone. That's when they should have done. Retrospective penalty for that would be unfair in my view. They've made the cock up. They didn't black flag him when they should have done. Even Casey Stoner's on the case with this. Casey Stoner, he disturbed his fishing, I think, just to come and have a comment on it as well. I mean, there isn't a rider, I don't think, that wouldn't agree with the fact he should have been black flagged. The fact that he wasn't black flagged, surely, I would, if they gave a retrospective penalty for that, then they should. You
can't. Exactly as you say. I mean, a bit like with a bike problem. If you make it to the end of the race, and as Fabio said, look, the race is finished. It finished safely for everyone. You can't, add something now. But it was interesting you were talking about, shortcutting the turn one. And Jack Miller said, look, the moment I saw him do that, I knew he was going to get a penalty. That's why I didn't overtake. I just sat behind him, made sure I finished, close enough for that 3-second penalty, looked up at the scoring tower. There I was in third. Thank you very much. So he said, look, everyone knows you've got to give up the ground if you run on there. It's shortcutting, and Fabio didn't.
How cool is Jack?
What you've underlined there is how confusing this all is. And Neil Cameron on Facebook has asked, and I don't know if you will be able to answer this, but he says, why have race stewards' decisions become so confusing and seemingly inconsistent again after a period where they'd seemingly become transparent and consistent? The exceeding track limits seemingly differing between classes at Mugello, and then the opaqueness of Fabio's 3-second one at Montmelo being 2 that spring to Neil's mind personally. So what do you think? Has it gone from being consistent and to suddenly, what's happening this year, especially when you add in the whole track limit saga as well?
I've been arguing about this for ages, and I speak quite often with some of the top men down at the track, still obviously only on the phone nowadays. But fact is, it's not transparent enough for me. I think what happens is they make decisions. Great. Give us the reasons. Where is the trail to get to that decision? Why does somebody get a bigger penalty than someone else for what seems like on the day something similar? It's not cumulative. It's not like they stack them up because they don't like a rider or a team or something like that. It is quite clear in their minds where they're going to. Again, to mention Simon Crafar, who I respect hugely, Simon's tried to get the answer to this quite often, and he's on site, so you can imagine. And when they explain, when Freddie or somebody like, I was supposed to meet with Freddie in the next couple of weeks, but he's not coming to London now. He, if I can persuade him, he'll come on this podcast with us and talk us through it when we get into the break a little bit later on. So you can all look forward to that back at home. And I can tell you, Freddie can speak for America in detail about every minute thing that he's ever done. So God help us when we get into this. But the fact is they will have a very clear way of thinking. These people are not idiots. Freddie Spencer is not an idiot. He knows what his reasoning is behind each and everything that he sanctions when it comes to a rider. It's just not clear to the rest of us. And that's what makes the sport look silly. If you're not going to get a transparent, okay, send us a sheet of paper. When you get I hate it when you get that sheet that comes, Pete, you get one as well, I'm sure, that gives you the penalty on it. Riding beyond, I can't even think of the bloody silly phraseology. I mean, it's like they've got a dictionary with 4 words in it. That's all they can use to actually explain something. When what they should do is take the time to give you the data, to give the media the data, so we can put it out there and everybody can see clearly. Confusion is your enemy when you've got a sport like this. When the gentleman who's written into you there, Harry, I mean, to not be able to explain it clearly to him, I feel like I've failed. But you can't get the detailed information. They have everything they need. They have data from the teams. They have more cameras than we see. They've got access to those cameras from every single angle as well. They have everything they need to put these penalties out But what they don't do is put out the clarity that we all need and deserve, bearing in mind, everybody watching this is paying one way or another. It's a service to the fans as much as it is. We need that clarity, and we don't get it, I don't think.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's the first or the last time we'll be talking about this either. So I will move it on there because thank you, Neil, for sending in the question there. But it's a very complicated subject, not just in MotoGP, but across all motorsport, it seems. But while we're sort of on Quartararo and Yamaha, Vinales, let's touch on him because that was, if I look at my piece of paper, that was Keith's prediction for this weekend. And, well, I mean, it could have be forgiven because, he's had a bit of a rough run of it, especially when you compare it to his teammate. He changed his crew chief going into this weekend, but he said that wasn't actually his decision, that was the team's. How big of a change is that? And he finished 6th in the end, so I didn't feel like we really saw a lot.
We can go back a bit further, can't we? What happened to Roman Facada? I mean, he's got rid of Esteban Garcia now, but it's all very well firing your crew chief out there because it isn't actually happening for you, but from the things I see, it looks more like it's down to Maverick than it is down to, the team have took it on the nose regarding Garcia, them moving him across. They've said it was their decision, but nah. They might have been the people that pulled the trigger to get rid of the guy, but at the end of the day, Silvano Gabasera is a really, really good crew chief. But is it going to fix Maverick Vinales' problems? No, I can't see that. I mean, I think Vinales is a fantastic rider, but he's flawed, and he's one of them guys that he's going to pull it out the bag. He's going to give us another win. I mean, we've had one this year, but he's going to give us another win. That is for sure. I thought he might have the bike and the track for him this weekend. That's why I went with him. I like a bit left of field. I like someone like him if he can come back and do it, but he's disappointing. Every racetrack, he's disappointing. I mean, he had a bit of pace late race again to bring him to, he was closing them down. But you never have confidence with him, do you, that he's going to be able to pull it out the bag, that he's going to do something spectacular. Quartararo you do, Zarco you do, just about everybody else, I've got to say, that's around him. But when you watch him on track, I don't know whether you were like this, Pete, when you watched him, but he just looked like he lacked that bite, that bit of extra you need. He's got lovely smooth lines when he's on his own and he closes them down, but he just looks like he's on the brakes a little bit early. I know Mir, obviously he's very, very good on the brakes, and Suzuki's very stable in the middle of the corners. And I'm not riding the bike, so please don't take it as a personal criticism of him because I can't. It's only the observation I'm making is that he looks a little shy, and that it shouldn't be like that. He should be, when he's on top of Mir, he should just stuff it up the inside of him and be done with it. It's kind of one of them ones where he just seems to be just lacking that bit of bite.
It does seem that he just gets unsettled, doesn't it? I mean, we were talking about the example of Marquez following him for a tow and how it sort of ruffled him at Mugello. And that does seem to be it because, Maverick is incredibly talented. He's one of the few riders that I think Marquez, certainly in the past, feared. Marquez thought if he gets going, because he'd raced him, hadn't he, when they were young, and he knew how talented, raw talent Maverick is. And he just, but it seems like he just gets sidetracked just at that moment when instead of putting everything together, it all just falls apart and it goes the wrong way. And
I wonder how much he misses that pastoral care he had at Suzuki, that atmosphere that he had at Suzuki. I think it was a really big deal for him to change to Yamaha. Yamaha looked like the right deal for everybody. I don't think retrospectively you can even disagree with the deal that he did when he went to Yamaha, but he loved it at Suzuki. They loved him. He loved them. And it worked really, really, really well. And of course, then Suzuki are coming good. And he'd have been well placed. And it's the type of motorcycle that would suit him as well. That's mind you, I would have said the Yamaha was as well, personally. But the Suzuki has come into the zone and all of this stuff, I bet, fiddles with his head. I think Maverick's one of them guys that's got just volumes of stuff going on in his bonds all the time instead of just gritting his teeth and getting on with it sometimes, perhaps.
And of course, this year Fabio's come in, hasn't he, as the new guy and won 3 races, and it's changed the whole dynamic within the team. Last year obviously was a disaster year for the factory team, but Maverick was the top guy, clearly, wasn't he? He still had that on his side, but this year it's hang on a minute, this new guy's come in, and it's he's now sort of rabbit in the headlights a bit and trying to sort himself out. But yeah, time's running out, isn't it, for this year?
Plus, we don't know really. Again, it feeds back into what we were talking about just a few minutes ago with Yamaha not really performing here like we thought they were going to do today. I think that's, Morbidelli, I can't even remember speaking about him during the course of the entire race. Morbidelli was way out of it when you wouldn't have expected him to be. Rossi fell down, turned 10. It's not been a great weekend for Yamaha, really. You would have expected a full Yamaha podium at the end of the day, and we've got KTM on top with again, not the man we might have expected to be on top, but he was, Oliveira. We won't make that mistake again, will we?
That's MotoGP. Now what I am annoyed at, because my backup was going to be Johann Zarco, who didn't win, but he gave it a good shot. And it's surely only a matter of time before Zarco gets his win this year. And it was a great second place for the Pramac Ducati. He seems to be getting better and better, but not like he was bad anyway, but he's just becoming more self-assured. It seems more self-confident. He's just got this nice, fresh contract extension as well. He's got that self-confidence, but actually, Herbert on Twitter has asked, Zarco's doing brilliantly well, but will he always be the bridesmaid and never the bride?
He is one of those riders, I don't think you can rule him out. I mean, he is actually one of those riders where I think he's so unique, I don't think you can rule him out. I mean, when you look at the devastation of KTM, the type of guy that he's completely different. I mean, I've never met anybody quite like Johann Zarco in the paddock. He's a unique individual. The way he goes about what he goes about is like no one else I know. When he left KTM, he kind of said to them, look, we're not getting along as brilliant as I want, so I'll give you a bit of notice. Being a very polite, nice man, and they just fired him out of there. They're ruthless at KTM. And I think that and his manager fell on. They fell out as well. His personal background, lots of things changed. He lived with Fallon. He was in this pressure cooker of management that didn't work for him. So there's a lot gone on behind the scenes with Johann Zarco, and we're only just seeing him emerge now. Pramac is a great team. I mean, anybody who's been in the paddock, it is just the best team. I mean, Jack Miller, when he was at Pramac, it's party, Friday night karaoke. I mean, we used to go to the karaoke dudes there as well. It's a very, very nice place to be with good people, know how to enjoy themselves, expect the most out of the rider. It seems to suit him at the moment. I don't think he can ride. No, I don't think he's always going to be the bridesmaid. I have a real feeling that Zarco is going to suddenly come really, really good. He's just got that feel about him. He hasn't won a race yet. He hasn't won a MotoGP race yet. But he ain't bloody far away. He had good pace at the end of that race as well.
And Pete, he's second in the championship as well. So he's the one bringing the fight.
Exactly. Yeah. As a satellite rider, I mean, he's on course to achieve what Morbidelli kind of achieved last year, isn't it? It's a great thing to do. It's not, you can say, okay, he's got the same bike as the factory team, but you still don't have all of those engineers that the factory team has and all of that sort of thing. He's not making mistakes, and as Keith said, he's different to the other riders, and not only in personality, also his riding style. He's a little bit like Lorenzo, I guess, in that he just he's very smooth on the bike, and he never likes to force the bike. He's always talking about wanting the bike to do what he wants it to do without kind of throwing it around too much. And so you always have to think, once he gets it working in the way he wants, which is slightly different to other riders, he really, as we're seeing now, he's really consistently quick with it. And he can be gentle on the tyres and everything else. And, he's doing a great job. It'd be it would be a crime if he doesn't win a race this year. And, it'd be great for Pramac as well, which haven't won with Ducati. So, yeah, I think surely sooner rather than later he's going to do it. And, he's not that far away in the championship, is he? He's 17 points. I mean, if he can just keep doing what he's doing now and being consistent, who knows where that's going to take him.
Yeah, I think everyone wants a Johann Zarco win, to be honest. And with that announcement earlier this week as well, that him and Jorge Martin, who returned this weekend back from injury, both signing to extend with Pramac. Let's briefly touch on Martin and his return. Off air, I called it underwhelming. Perhaps that was not quite the right word, but great to see him return from injury and be back on the grid racing where he belongs. But it crashed before the race had even started, had to start from the back, came home 14th. kept it on the track. Could we have expected much more? How many races can you give him to get back up to that speed that we saw right at the start of the year?
I think you're being a bit tough on him at the moment. It's he took a massive clattering. I mean, he's come back from a proper bashing. I think we need to give him a little bit more time yet before I can make any real comment on it. But I mean, I think that Jorge Martin is he's a good rider. Let's wait and see what happens when he gets fit again. I mean, to make comparisons, I mean, Marc Marquez, third crash in a row, third meeting that he's piled out of. When you're injured, riders know it. What they're capable of. As soon as they cock their leg over a bike at the beginning, you'll never ever hear it. They'll never ever tell you the truth. It's never something that you put out in the public. So Jorge Martin, I don't know what's creaking and what's not working with him just yet. And falling off on the sighting lap this morning was a bit of a shame as well. So it's one of them ones where we've not had a clear run at it yet. Saxon Ring next round is a go-kart track. It's horrible. Most of the riders don't like it. It's dangerous. The barriers are too close to the track in so many corners there. You've got the waterfall turn 11 in the Saxon Ring. So which after spending how many, 5, 6, 7 left-handers, I think there are, actually thinking about it. There's 7 left-handers before you turn right at one of the most tricky corners anywhere on the calendar. It just drops off the edge of the earth on the right-hand side of the tyre. So confidence-wise, the next track is going to be tricky as well. Kind of led into Marc Marquez a bit there at the moment. Do you find it slightly unusual, Pete, that the two so-called top men from before, Rossi and Marquez, are pushing back a bit on their performances? Like, I think both have said this week that they're both all right. Marquez said something this morning about it's the first 7 laps he did at a race were the best he's done this year, and Rossi's saying he ain't all over, or the effective part of it's not all over. And I'm thinking to myself, hang on a minute, am I watching 2 different riders to these two? Because one of them's crashing his brains out and can't ride the bike anything like he used to be able to, and you can pretty much say that about Rossi as well at the moment. He's not having anything like the Rossi kind of performance you might have expected. And I'm 100% sure that we're going to hear after the break, if not during the break, that he's out of it for next year. I cannot see Rossi continuing. I just can't. It's he's not doing himself any favours. He's not doing his legacy any favours. Can you see him continuing? I can't. Not into next year now. I just don't.
I mean, he's always said it's about results, and there's no results at the moment. So, if we take it at face value, what he's saying, then exactly. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a way that he can continue. The difficulty then is, who do you put in his place? It might actually be an easier decision for Rossi than for Yamaha, if that makes sense. That Yamaha have to find a replacement. There was a few rumours. Our colleague Neil Morrison was saying on TV today that maybe Yamaha had approached Raul Fernandez and been told that no, he's firmly under options, should we say, at KTM. So, I mean, he would have been, someone who you might say, okay, that would be an obvious swap. But who else might they put there? So,
what I mean, this is not the first time Yamaha have been behind the game in management of their riders. The times they found themselves in a situation where they don't have that ladder worked out. And we're there again now. Like Rossi was going to have to roll over at some stage, but they don't have any succession plan. I mean, that for me is not great management. KTM, of course KTM are going to hang on to Fernandez if they can. They've got him blocked off already. There's no way you're going to let a talent go to another manufacturer if you're doing your job right. But it always strikes me that Yamaha haven't quite got that side of their management right. We shouldn't be asking the question, where's the next Yamaha man coming from? There should be 3 of them already lined up. It doesn't make sense to me.
I think that as far as the factory team, they've got Quartararo, haven't they? And there's increasing rumours that maybe, Vinales could face pressure from Morbidelli for his seat in the future. The question is Petronas. Now Petronas, obviously, they've got a Moto3 team and a Moto2 team. They've got this obvious step ladder of riders, and they've shown that they like to kind of take a gamble with young guys, with Quartararo and Morbidelli. That's exactly what they did. And I think that Razdan had big hopes for, Xavi Vierge and people like that, and maybe Jake Dixon as well. But you wouldn't say at this stage that either of them have kind of are ready for MotoGP next year. So there is this, as you say, there's this there could be this void, it looks like. If Rossi does call it a day, who are they going to put there?
Factory Yamaha should not be relying completely on the KTM's ladder. On the independent team's ladder, which is what they're doing. Razlan Razali and the Sepang International Circuit, they run a great setup, fantastic independent setup. John McPhee, they looked at moving him up into Moto 2. Jake Dixon stayed there in the end because Jake was having a good year last year. He's not having a good year this year. Rah. So right now, Razali's, golden independent team is not looking quite so sharp. But they ended up with Rossi being foisted on them effectively. I always said it right from the start, poison chalice. You've got the biggest name in the entire world that's just been put back into your independent team. And if he doesn't perform, chances are that the bike's going to get the blame. So they gave him a full factory bike, so there is no blame there right now. And then Morbidelli's nose was put out of joint. They probably mired Morbidelli a little bit. He should have had a lot more full factory input, in my view. I still think that Yamaha is not managing it as well as they should do. I just that's my feeling. As they don't seem to have a solid plan of where the next generation of people are coming from. Whereas, Honda put their money all over everything. KTM have bought up everything. So, it's a situation where, and they've aligned themselves. And, Aki Ayo, I mean, what a great manager, what a great team that Aki Ayo, the Finn, runs anyway. Nicky Ayo, his son, is in there now as well. They've got some brilliant people that are on that team. And Remy, Gardner and Fernandez running away with it like they are at the moment. A 1-2, 2 weekends running. A rookie that's in second place, looking so good at the moment in that championship. And they've already signed, Remy up for the MotoGP setup next year. It's proactive thinking. And we're in that kind of business. You need to see what's happening over the next 2 or 3 years. It just strikes me that Yamaha are either very, very unlucky or they're not really thinking quite far enough into the future.
Well,
in my opinion.
Just forget next generation for a minute and current generation and Honda having another woeful time of it because we will come on to all of that. But James has asked a really good question here, as we just spoke about Marquez as well, who looked to be in the fight. He was in the fight today, which was good to see until he binned it. But James has said, after this weekend, I get the feeling Marc Marquez is pretty close to 100%, but I suspect that it's now the bike letting down the whole team. Do you feel that it's now Honda dragging all their riders down, or is there something more to it still? Do you think Marc Marquez is now where he needs to be?
No, Mark's still not 100% for himself. He's getting there, and I think that everybody anywhere would agree with that, surely. But Honda isn't a bike that you want to be on at the moment. Paul Espargaro crashed today. Mark crashed today. Taka Nakagami, he was somewhere thereabouts, fast in warm-up again.
Best Honda was 11th.
Yeah, and that's the situation we're in now. Honda have been on the back foot for years. It's been Marc Marquez that's made the difference consistently over the years. It's not been about anyone. They let Cal Crutchlow go off and be a Yamaha tester, and that's another thing. When does he test? Cal's on the best paid holiday I think he's ever had. It's a situation, and that annoys me as well. It's no good blocking off the likes of Lorenzo last year and Cal this year for some reason or another, and you don't go bloody testing. I don't get that at all. Anyway, back to Marquez. It's Marquez that has made the difference consistently over the years. Cal has been an admirable. I mean, I think that why do we always appreciate something when it's gone? Cal Crutchlow, great rider, always has been. Go back to British Supersport days. He was something a little bit special. Came through World Supersports. He was almost kind of not dismissed, because he wasn't dismissed, because you couldn't dismiss Cal ever. But his talent was it almost felt to me like it was slightly downgraded sometimes. People didn't give him the credit of what he was doing on that bike, particularly on the Honda. I mean, the Ducati was a different matter. We won't go back there. But even then, after he decided he was going to go to LCR, he rode the Ducati really well. Cal's a trier. He's tough, and he really works hard on it, and he never gives up. And that's Marquez as well. But that bike seemed to have evolved all the way around Marc And the second anyone else needed to ride it, I mean, Nakagami rode the old one pretty well. I think the old chassis worked quite well as well. And that's the other problem with new factory bikes. You jump on a new factory bike, it's never everything that you want it to be. I mean, they're always difficult. They're at the beginning of the development when a new factory bike arrives on the track. The old factory bike that you rode last year has got all the last year's data and all the knowledge that you've got to go with it. So therefore, it's an easier motorbike to ride, an easier motorbike to adapt to each and every track you go to, because you've already got all of that information in your head or in the data machine, the computer thingy.
Very technical.
Like I am. So it's kind of one of those situations where, I don't know, new factory bikes, they're always a bit tricky. Marquez has come back after other people have been playing with his bike since Jerez last year. Other people have been tweaking his motorbike since Jerez last year. Brother Alex has had his input into it. Lots of people have been, and maybe it ain't the bike that it was even when Mark left it. And Mark now having to adapt his slightly broken body to it as well. And he still looks a little awkward in places on it. It's tough for Honda. But again, like I was critical of Yamaha for their planning, I think the same could be said of Honda in their planning. They had all their eggs in Marc Marquez's basket.
Is it feasible to even suggest that Marquez, assuming he gets back to full fitness before the end of the season, and we've said this before loads of times, we will see him win another race this year, all things being well, would he start to look about if he's not happy with that Honda?
I think everybody looks about all the time. I don't think anybody never looks about.
But with this Yamaha situation as well, do you think, with the poor planning side of it, do you think, there's going to be one eye on, that could be
we're only five.
Switch?
It's only 5 minutes ago that we were all talking about perhaps he'll switch to KTM. If you remember, It would have been the big buy, wouldn't it? Have been buy Marquez into KTM, but KTM balked at the idea because if he won on a KTM, they'd say it was Marc Marquez. If he lost on a KTM, they'd say it was a KTM bike. So it was I talked about Poison Chalice earlier on. So it was a tough job for KTM. So in the end, can you imagine the mega bucks that would have been involved in that? He wouldn't have to do his own washing for a year or two, that's for sure.
All right, well, let's talk about the confirmed move that is definitely on the cards that we briefly touched on. We haven't spoken about it. Remy Gardner confirmed for Tech 3 next year. So that means Petrucci and Lecuona, one of them is going to go at the very least. Well, actually, just on I want to touch on Lecuona briefly, because actually I thought he looked like he had a decent run of it, running in the top 9 this weekend before he crashed out. How are you looking now at Petrucci and Lecuona? Who's going to go? Are they both going to go? What's going to happen next? And then Remy Gardner finally getting his chance, well-deserved chance as well.
Pete, I don't know about you, but I think they'll be fairly relaxed regarding who they get rid of. And why make the decision early? Let them roll out a little bit longer would be my personal management side to that. I mean, let's wait and see. Why make a decision too early? They've got all these guys under contract. At the end of the day, they'll work out their strategy. They don't have to make a decision right now, do they?
No, exactly. And just as we were talking about the kind of staircase of talent, and you were saying about how well planned KTM is, that's coming kind of at the expense of Lecuona and Petrucci now, isn't it? Because for KTM, it's great. But for the riders, they now realize there's all these guys knocking on the door just behind them going, we're ready. And it looks like they will keep one of them at this stage. So it is kind of just a duel for this remaining seat. I honestly don't know which one they'll keep. Lecuona is in his second year. Petrucci's only in his first year. He's a bit bigger on the bike. It seems like KTM are kind of interested in having or trying to get their bike to work with Petrucci as a slightly bigger rider, because all their other guys are quite small. And I think they want to, maybe that would help make the bike a bit more complete overall. But I think they'll wait a bit. I think probably at least until the summer break. Lecuona was going well this weekend. He was quick again, but he, it's like a lot of people, he needs the end result, and that hasn't come yet. So, I think if you were to sort of pin me down now, I would say they would probably go with Petrucci. But if Lecuona puts in some good results, it could all change. As you say, I think they're prepared to sit back and wait a bit, because it's not a big year as far as most of the rider contracts. Most of all the top guys really are nailed down to at least the end of next year. So they can afford to wait, really. It's their last available seat. And I think we'll we'll get an answer during the summer break, probably.
I was smiling slightly there, Harry, if you noticed that obviously KTM's test rider, who really is responsible for putting a lot of good ideas together, Danny Pedrosa, is about the size of Petrucci's arm. so that KTM is being developed pretty much by a fella that's style and size is quite different to Danilo's. And I think I love Danilo Petrucci. Who doesn't love Danilo Petrucci? He's such a nice man. And he said, look, if it was at the end now, I'd be grateful for what I've had in MotoGP. He's a bloody super stock rider, for God's sake. He's come the hardest of ways into MotoGP factory rides. I mean, to come from super stocks, very few people do that. Very, very few people do that. It's a difficult route to come. But when you're his size, you're made for super stock, really, aren't you? But anyway, we wish him well, whatever the circumstances. We do Iker Lecuona, of course, but I'm slightly the opposite. I think Lecuona being, I think maybe it'll be Lecuona that might come good towards the end of the year, personally. But there you go.
Well, we'll have to keep a watchful eye over that one. Well, it was Miguel Oliveira, though, who took the win ahead of Johan Zarco and Jack Miller. Quartararo fell to fourth in the end, and Joan Mir closed the top five. That was your pick, wasn't it, Pete? You were Mir last week. So no points for anybody. So it's still me. I'm still the only one with 0 points. But Fabio Quartararo has plenty of points. He sits top of the standings, 118, 17 ahead of Zarco. And Miller now moves up to third on 90 points. And with the win, Miguel Oliveira works his way up to seventh currently with 54 points. So probably one to keep an eye on if he keeps going the way he is. Moto 2 now. Let's switch to, I want to talk about that for a little bit. Was one of the perhaps quieter races of the weekend, but still a few bits to pick up on for sure. Remy Gardner started on pole and managed to cross the line first as well, ahead of teammate Ralph Fernandez, and Xavi Vierge took third. Remy Gardner looked cool, calm and collected yet again, second on the trots. It spiced up halfway through though, didn't it, when Fernandez managed to get the lead from Gardner, but in hindsight now, again, coming back to what we were talking about in MotoGP, it looked like Remy was just happy to let that happen and again take stock. And then that brilliant dive bomb move down into turn one, where I did not think he would get that stopped. He just looked like he had beautiful control over the bike the whole weekend.
I'll tell you what, you tend to have beautiful control when you're committed to the inside line and you've got a rider on the outside. You've got to let the brakes off and make it work. The worst thing you can do is be committed to the inside line, chicken out, and then just ram them straight in the backside. And that, especially if it's your teammate. Yeah. So it was one of them situations where it was beautiful control, and it looked dead clean, like he meant it. But I've got to say that he had to let the brakes off to make sure that Rayon knew that he was there. Remy rode a brilliant race, and you're right from my point of view. I think that the maturity that he showed, Rayon, bloody fast rookie. I mean, he's really come good. There's no doubt about that. You can see that he's going to be a massive talent. But Remy sat back, whereas in the past, I think he might have snapped straight back at him and had another, been a bit of a pushing and shoving session. But Remy sat right back, very mature ride from him. And he had every bit of pace that he needed, and he's increased his lead in the championship, which of course is critical. 16 more points, I think, over Sam Lowe's, who's back in fourth place still. Sam actually finishing, I think, will feel like a bonus to him. It's been an unfortunate period of races for him. Seventh place won't be what he wanted, that's for sure, but he did need to finish. He desperately needed to finish with sensible points.
Yeah, well, and a couple of people as well to pick up on there. Jake Dixon didn't have a great weekend either. Yet again, crashed in quali and the warm-up and finished 18th overall, didn't he? And Marco Bezzecchi was an interesting one, I thought, as well, because he was saying that all weekend, even after 3 podiums with the bounce, he felt like he's kind of nowhere. So it seems like fourth was a bit of a salvation for him in the end. But a great result as well for Xavi Vierge in third, just ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bezzecchi wants to win. That's all there is to it. Fourth place is, he ain't on the podium. He wants to win. So that's a bad weekend for him, as it is for most of these blokes, it's got to be said. But you can only fit 3 up there.
Unless you're Remy Gardner or Ralph Fernandez, it's a bad weekend, isn't it?
Well, I mean, a 1-2 for Aki Ayo, we mentioned him earlier on, manager of owner of that team. Aki manages riders and manages and owns that team. A 1-2 for them 2 weekends running. It does not get better than that.
And actually, though, coming back, and Pete, you might be able to weigh on this as well, on the contract side of things. Josh on Twitter has asked, there's lots of rumours going around again concerning the Petronas SRT team, with Jake Dixon and Raul Fernandez both being on the radar. You can understand Fernandez. Jake Dixon, with his current form, though, I know he's obviously shown brilliant form in the past, but it's just not going his way. Is there any scope that could be a possibility, or is that just absolute rubbish?
I mean, as we've said, there's going to be, it looks like, a space in the team. Yeah, there's a space in the team. And this is the big question. It's a great ride. I mean, this is the thing. The Petronas, this is a team that finished title runner-up last year. This is one of the top rides in MotoGP. But there's no obvious person to put in there. And you would think, as Keith was saying, that they're going to go, right, we need to get a young talent in here to just make sure that we have got this escalator of riders in case somebody tempts away Fabio, in a couple of years' time with a big money offer or something like that we have always got these other guys to fill the gap. I don't see at this moment exactly who they could go for that would obviously take that. I mean, you look to the top guys in Moto2, Remy Gardner, already signed and sealed, so he's gone. And then you guys like Bezzecchi or something like that, he's tied in with VR46. He's got, depending on what Rossi does, he's got a fighting chance of being in the VR46 MotoGP team next year. So, but beyond that, as we're seeing, the success in Moto2 is kind of so focused within a couple of riders at the moment that there's not really any obvious choices. And team managers, they don't like risk like anyone else. They want to take the obvious, the guy who's dominating and doing fantastically. And so, now's the time to do it. I mean, now is the time when the contracts, it's no good waiting until the end of the year when everything's signed and then being brilliant. Now is the time to impress people. But for me, I don't see any obvious choice at the moment.
Well, not on these shores, maybe, but I'd have got a signature off Garrett Gerloff by now. I'd have made sure he was in the running somewhere along the lines. When he came and had a little play, he rode brilliantly well. The Americans, it's a big market as well, so it sort of fits in along those lines. I don't know what Garrett Gerloff's contractual situation is in America, but you can be fairly sure he can be bought out of that, should they want to. I'm surprised we've not heard more about that, actually. It surprises me slightly. It's about marketplace as much as anything as well. I mean, Dorna are desperate to make sure we got some Brits in there. They're desperate for Americans. Australia is now getting fairly well covered. Again, they're coming back onto the... It's about... This is where the politics and the marketeering of it all comes in, isn't it? And you've got to look at that side of it as well. Sometimes it's not quite as straightforward as bringing someone into it. We'll see. I'm sure the brains behind each and every team are working overtime at the moment to try and plug these gaps that they've got that are coming. I'm pretty sure in my mind that they already know what's happening with Valentino Rossi. It will have had to have been discussed because Rossi is working on his own team as well. There will be people in the paddock that will have an idea, a fairly educated idea as to what's going on with Valentino Rossi for the rest of this year and next, obviously. But us mere plebs will not hear about that for some considerable time.
Well, Remy Gardner leads the way for the time being. 11 points ahead of teammate Raul Fernandez in Moto2 with 139 to 128. Marco Bezzecchi is in third with 101 points. Moto3 now. And in Moto3, we were treated to an amazingly close race. One of the closest Moto3 races I think we've seen in recent times. It seemed like no one wanted to take the lead over the line in the last corner. But in the end, it was Sergio Garcia who took the win from Jeremy Alcover, and Denis Oncu made it onto the podium after Masia was demoted for track limits, something we've seen plenty of times before. And Oncu was incredibly emotional, wasn't he? But you really couldn't have called it, even on that final lap, because at one point it was Binder, Acosta, Rodrigo, all up front, and then suddenly Acosta's down in 13th, Binder's somewhere in the middle, and they end up 5th, 6th and 7th. Garcia, who won it, started 19th. What a crazy race.
Well, it was crazy, but it was also a bit bloody silly, wasn't it, really, at the end of the day? I mean, that final, the penultimate lap coming onto the front straight when everybody's backing up in the middle of a race. I mean, hang on a second. because no one wanted to lead they wanted a tow onto the last lap, which gives you quite an advantage in Moto3, obviously. 2 shocks for me. John McPhee was definitely race-winning material, and I didn't really see the mistake he made. I don't understand how he ended up where he ended up, but he's 18th in the championship now, still only on 22 points. I mean, his year is gone. You talk about Petronas a lot. Where is he going at the end of the day? What is happening with John McPhee? And the Leopards were nowhere this week either. The bikes that are always the ones to beat, they weren't where we would have expected them to be all the way through it. So there's a lot of questions and not many bloody answers, I've got to say, Harry, on this one. I mean, was the Moto3 race entertaining or was it dangerous? I'll tell you what, it was a fine line between the two there for me on a couple of occasions. A lot of very, very close manoeuvres that could have had. There was one, I'm trying to think who it was now, where if it had actually gone wrong, if it had been tripped up in the middle of the pack, we would have had a 5-6 bike pile up right in the middle of it, which would have been a problem as well. McPhee coming through qualifying 1, fastest in warm-up, looked like the man that had got absolute control over the race, and yet again, somehow, I mean, I don't know what McPhee did in a previous life, but it obviously wasn't very good.
Pete, McPhee looked like he had it sewn up but it was an odd place to see that bike go off the high side there in that corner, as Keith says. But what's McPhee got to do? Like, what's next for him? What's the feasible option? We talk about potential moves up, but is that going to happen?
I mean, he's been looking for this Moto2 seat, as Keith said, for a few years now. I think that the accident on Sunday, it sounded like he thought he could break away, which no one's done in Moto3 this year, but that seemed to be what he was trying to do. So he was trying to make a break, and then that was when it all went wrong. As we say, the seat or the moving up option, the obvious one is to move up with Petronas, but then that comes back to, as we say, what happens with Vierge and Dixon. If they move up, then there's a space. If they don't, it relies on one of them moving to another team. Or does John have options or look elsewhere from Petronas? I think obviously his first choice would be to stay with Petronas.
John's a race winner. The trouble is, as a team manager, you look at John McPhee, he's an athlete. He does everything right. He's a great lad to have around as well. The fact is McPhee is a Grand Prix winner, and he could win Grand Prix for the foreseeable future. It just seems to be that he's got a truckload of bad luck that he tows around with him, and I don't understand it. I wasn't really joking when I said what's he done badly in a previous life, because certainly the penalties don't seem to fit any kind of crime that he's done that I've seen. Anyway, I mean, McPhee looks like he could win a race quite easily any day. It's just one of the, as a manager, you'd be reluctant to sort of just cast that kind of talent adrift. Mind you, having said that, we have seen great talents cut adrift in the past, particularly in the Moto3 class. Moto3, there's nowhere to go. There aren't any other classes around the world that you're going to get involved in as a Moto3 rider. You've got to move up. You've got to be in Moto2 and move on to MotoGP, or from Moto3 into World Supersport or into World Superbike. You've got to move up. You can't continue riding a little bike. And we don't know how good John McPhee will be on a bigger bike yet. That's the risk. You move him up, but we don't know whether he is going to be able to be a big bike rider. Now, people like Remy Gardner, all along, Wayne has always said to me, his dad has always said to me, you want to see him on a big bike, the way he drifts it, the way he uses the power. Sure enough, that's what it looks like. He's signed up now for MotoGP. We can expect great things from Remy Gardner. I don't know if it's genetics or what, but sometimes some riders, when they get on a bigger bike, go even better. Quartararo is a good example of that as well. It's a situation where I can't see the same thing from John. I can't see him stepping up to a Moto2 bike. And in my head, and I suspect that there are a lot of other people that are thinking the same thing. Yeah, we could put him on a Moto2 bike, but what if he's an absolute disaster? We've wasted a year. It's a real tricky one with John. He's got mega talent. He's a race winner all day long in Moto3 if things go right, if the luck is on his side. And I just feel sometimes that I don't really believe in luck that much, I must say, but I do when it comes to John McPhee to a certain extent. He is unlucky. Sometimes he makes his own bad luck by qualifying not particularly well, so he sticks himself in a risky position. But he's fast. He should be winning races. He should have won the World Championship this year. At the beginning of the year, I would have said another year with Petronas, with the way it was going at the end of last year, he was one of the men that you would have a little bit of money on for winning the world title. And he finds himself 18th on only 22 points compared with the 120 of Pedro Acosta, brand spanking new 16-year-old come 17-year-old now, who's running away with it at the front, albeit 13 points less than he had lead going into this round.
Well, is that McPhee old news now? Surely.
I tell you what, that's harsh, Harry, but I absolutely understand where you're coming from with that one. It's almost like we've heard it all before, and it's a question of whether everyone in management has moved on with that frame of mind as well, and that's what's going to be the downfall of John McPhee. He's a great rider. He's a Grand Prix winner. He can win more Grand Prix, but will he be given the opportunity moving forward to do that? That's going to be the big question. The other problem, of course, in Moto3 is you don't earn big bucks. It's not a class where you earn massive money. And McPhee is whatever he is now, 28 or something, getting on for 28, isn't he? He's got a lot of life left in him yet. And what do you do after Moto3? I suppose we should go and have a word with Efrain Vasquez or somebody to see what happened to him. When Efrain Vasquez was a man at the front of the Moto3 field for some time, and yet, he got cast off fairly swiftly when he got to that cut-off age of 28. I mean, if you remember, Efrain Vasquez and Jack Miller were at it every single place you went to. What did Jack Miller call him? T-Rex. Plenty of bite, but short arms. And the reason for that was Efrain Vasquez wasn't as good because he was short-armed. All his weight was over the front all the time, and the back was in the air, so he used to call him T-Rex. I love Miller. Plenty of bite, but short arms, so he couldn't brake as well as everyone else in the braking area.
Actually, you bring that up quite aptly, and perhaps a final word on McPhee as well, because another thing that's going to be, that's all, he's not an idiot. That's all going to be going around in his mind as well. He's going to be thinking these exact same things while also having to deliver on track as well. But it's also the factor in moving up through the ranks is surely a marketability side of it as well, because these riders, are they going to want a 28 going on 29-year-old, someone who perhaps doesn't always come across the happiest, perhaps, in interviews and things like that? That all has a knock-on effect, doesn't it? We see it up and down sport overall. So that's surely going to be a factor as well. I don't know how you see it.
I think that if you were to look at something positive at the moment for John, it's to say that contracts for Moto2 get decided a lot later than MotoGP. So, the title, I mean, as Keith was saying, this year, I mean, the luck has been unbelievable. I mean, I've never known anyone have such being taken out by other riders, falling up, unbelievable. But if there is anything to say, it's that, look, there's a lot of Moto2 seats for next year that are not decided yet. And you've got time to turn this around, and you've just got to focus on that and take it race by race. And really, that's what he's got to go for. As you're saying, there's all these other factors. The main one, though, is that if you win, everyone loves you, don't they? And so that's what he's got to do, and if you can't win, then you can try and play on other aspects of your, oh, look at me, I'm really marketable and everything else. But if you can win, no one will care. Yeah. So for John, I think that's what he's just got to keep his focus on and just keep reminding himself it's not too late to turn this season around. Maybe, of course, the title is looking unrealistic, but you can still have a great year. You can still kind of secure a ride next year in Moto2, we would imagine, is where he wants to be.
Fingers crossed. I don't know what side of the bed I woke up on today, but I've been very harsh, haven't I? But it is Pedro Acosta who does hold on to that championship lead with 120 points in Moto3. Sergio Garcia is second with 81 points, and Masia third with 72 points. And as we said, McPhee with it all to do, down in 18th with just 22 points to his name. At the moment, well, action, as ever in MotoGP, across the classes, it never fails to disappoint. No insider's guide or predictions, despite Keith's avid preparation. Very impressed by it. He's even printed a map out. But Keith, you're going to have to hold on to it for next week, because that's when we do it all over again. We'll have it all then, because we've also got to do the predictions as well, because currently I'm still on 0 and you two are both on 1. So that does also mean I get first dibs again as well. So we'll do it all again next week, I promise, because we will then have a proper look forward to the next round in Germany for round 8 on the 20th of June. So 1 week off for racing, but we will be back before then to preview it all. Keith, Pete, thank you as ever for being alongside alongside me. And thank you as well for joining us. Do make sure you leave us a review or a comment wherever you're listening to this podcast. Get in touch as well. We love hearing from you and your questions. Send them to me and I'll put them across to the guys and we'll get them answered for you as best we can. But in the meantime, keep up to date with all the latest on Crash.net and we'll see you for the next one.